Welcome back to Halftime Report on CNBC-TV18. Now, moving on, Day 3 of India Energy Week is underway in New Delhi with over 120 nations participating in the 4-day event. My colleague Manisha Gupta caught up with Amrita Sen of Energy Aspects and started by asking about her views on crude oil prices and oversupply. Let's listen in.
I think the going forward bit, let's define it, right? This year, next year, the reality is OPEC still has spare capacity. Yep. So if there were to be an outage, there will be enough oil to balance the markets. I agree that's been the vibe that, look, there's no shortage. Having said that, there's ample worries about Iranian and Russian sanctions. Should they kind of get enforced, that could really be a lot of kind of bad news for refiners here who are already struggling with the higher price of heavy crude oil, right? But I'm talking more towards the end of this decade. I think that's when you'll really start to see the tightening, especially if then U.S. production growth is flatlining.
The other thing is about tariffs as well, and you mentioned that. And while it may not have a direct impact, but indirect, yes, because it impacts global economy, it does impact demand going at the end of the day. And we haven't seen China recover as much as we would have wanted it to.
For sure. I was in China at the start of the year. Definitely a lot better than last year. Last year was really, really horrible in terms of demand. But like you said, and I don't think it will really ever go back to the heydays of China. The economy is different now, which has a huge implication for global growth, right? Oil demand growth on average used to be 1.2 to 1.4 million barrels per day. Today, with this China, it's more like 800, 900,000 barrels per day, right? Then tariffs pose a massive downside risk. The tariff threats to Canada and Mexico is probably more a negotiating tool that we see from Trump, because he does want to renegotiate kind of NAFTA effectively. But those to China, he's very serious about. My worry about tariffs more globally is that Trump and his team believe that tariffs are a very good source of income for the government so that they can do tax cuts. And that's where my fear is even for India, that does he just do a universal tariff of 10% or whatever that number is? I'm hoping with Prime Minister Modi there today, I think maybe there are some deals. I mean, ultimately it's all about deals, right? Maybe India buys some more LNG, maybe some, tech/military equipment, and then there are no tariffs. But I think that's the challenge, is that if you view tariffs as something that you can gain revenue from, the urge will be to put tariffs on all your trading partners.
What is your sense then on the crude oil prices from here? I know there are a lot of ifs and buts, and I'm assuming it's going to be a more quarterly phenomena telling where the crude prices are headed.
I think so. I think even, I mean, sometimes one of the things I'll say, we work with 600-700 companies globally. The biggest trend I'm seeing right now is people are just saying, given the volume of uncertainty, we don't even want to trade crude right now. They're doing much more through the options market rather than futures market, because you just don't know. Trump might wake up talking about tariffs and end the day talking about sanctions, right? It's a very wide spectrum. In terms of our price forecast, we've had a counter consensus view for this year. We've kind of said prices will be around these levels, like around $80 for Brent, between 75 and 80. I know a lot of people were talking about $60 oil and so on. We've kind of stuck to our guns by talking about A, OPEC will manage this market, and B, sanctions are coming. But like you said, I think monthly and I think quarterly is going to be the key focus. First half might actually be tighter because of sanctions. Second half, if you get workarounds, can actually be looser.
What's your sense on Indian markets then? And you've been having conversations with a lot of Indian refiners. We've seen guidance being cut for 2025, but you said exploration is something that Indian companies are looking at.
Yeah, I was just on a panel with ONGC and Oil India. They were definitely very optimistic. But I would say as much about international prospects as about the domestic prospect. I think India's basins are challenging, for sure. The government's doing a good job in kind of opening it up. I think that you will start to see production kind of picking up a little bit more. And we've had some success stories, for sure. But this is, you're still 600,000-700,000 barrels per day numbers talking about, rather than millions of barrels per day. I think the question is, where does India partner with, right? Latin America, Africa, we've seen more there. Do we see India going into Russia, for instance, right? There is definitely prospects there. I think those are more interesting stories for the upstream. Downstream, all the refiners very focused on Russia sanctions, and again, price of heavy crude oil and fuel oil, that's getting very expensive. all the Indian refiners are geared towards running those crudes. So unfortunately for profitability, that's a hit for them, right? I think that's been the story of all my conversations here.
A final question then, and would you say India is finally getting a proper mix now? Because from crude oil and more gas, and now LNG seems to be a big story globally as well. And then we're looking at biofuels. There was a hydrogen bus down there.
Yes.
There is also nuclear conversations around. So what is your take?
Yeah, I was fascinated because I was moderating Minister Puri's panel yesterday and he mentioned nuclear. I was like, wow, that's interesting. Of course, there are still restrictions, right, how much nuclear India can do. I would say India's biggest success story has been ethanol, right, if you look at the biofuel story. And rightly so, because we are a very rich agricultural country, so that makes a lot of sense. I'm still a little bit skeptical on green hydrogen. The costs are still very high. And ultimately, hydrogen is gas, right? That means you need to import even more gas. So I don't think that's as simple. I do think that ethanol or the biofuel story, the biogas story is going to be very, very big in India. And nuclear, look, I think if you're serious about energy transition, you have to be serious about nuclear. I understand it's a very complicated topic. But yeah, I think even solar, and I think you're going to see a lot of solar kind of investments here as well.
Okay, and with that, it's a wrap on this edition of Halftime Report on CNBC TV18. Thank you so much for tuning in. Up next, we have Business Lunch, and Nigel will take your leave, and I will come back with Business Lunch.